Welcome, GOAT Format Duelists. We've got our top decks of the month coming up for you today. These are decks that are making a big impact on the meta, decks that are fresh and interesting, but more importantly, are crushing tournaments. So if you're looking to stay on top of GOAT Format's meta going into June, then you're in the right place. Welcome to GOAT Duels, I'm ACP. Now let's get started with our first deck. It's a fun one, it's a sexy one. It's Ritual Chaos. Now, this deck was taken to a second place finish by Claudio Destro. Apologize if I get anyone's name wrong. It got second out of 150 players in an Italian tournament. Definitely no small feat. Now let's start with how this deck works, because I see some newer players expressing confusion over some of the ratios. For example, why 3 ritual monsters, 1 ritual spell? Well, mainly these are here just to get searched. Most of the time, if you got a Relinquished in your hand, you're not going to summon it. You're going to discard it to a Raigeki Break or a Tribe or a Graceful or whatever other discard effects you play. And the cool thing about this is Manji's a light, it searches a dark, boom, light plus dark equals chaos. Now, I will say the reason that I call this deck Ritual Chaos rather than Relinquished Chaos or something else is because the ritual monster that you play is largely preference, and it's also going to be meta dependent. So in the list that was featured on this channel, we played Zork. You don't have to play Zork. You don't have to play Relinquished either. Some people even like the Masked Beast. Those are all options. Note, I know some newer players will ask, Sonic Bird is a win. So there's a reason that we play Senju but not Sonic Bird. And, that's why we play these ratios. Senju can search the monster, but, it can't search the ritual spell. I will say, what do I like about this deck? One, this man was not afraid of Book of Moon, right? You'll notice that over the last year or so, Book of Moon has gotten a lot less popular. And how have players responded to that? Well, they've been playing more GOATS meta, which we see here. And Relinquished, of course, basically just a mini Thousand Eyes Restrict. So I like that we had no fear of the Book of Moon. I like that we were playing the numbers, so to speak, countering the meta. That's nice. I will also say, in the list that was, again, featured on our channel, we did have some flip effects. We had Faith into Kochi. I think whether you play those flip effects is going to depend, again, on the meta, their pros and cons. But here in this list, and in some of the other lists that are commonly played, we went for the old no face-down monsters trick to not only brick Crossout, but also brick Mind Control. A lot of people are main decking Mind Control right now. So yes, they can Mind Control our Chaos Sorcerer, but heck, if we do set a monster to try to bait Mind Control, it's just going to be a Sangan. Their Mind Controls are not going to get a lot of value, and I think a lot of people will forget to side out those Mind Controls because they see Thunder Dragon and they see Chaos Sorcerer, and they're going to go, oh, I see Thunder Dragon, I see Chaos Sorcerer, time to side in Mind Control. But Mind Control, not so great against this deck. I will say, again, I want to clear up a point of confusion on these Manjus and Senjus. They get their effects when they are normal summoned or flip summoned, not special summoned. So Tsukiyomi, great synergy with Manju. I like that we've got the second Tsukiyomi in the side to bring it against something like Warriors or Goat Control. However, I don't know if this player knew this or not, but Premature Burial doesn't work with these guys. Now, Premature, you have some decent targets. You can get back a Tribe or, I don't know, a Thunder Dragon you discarded, or maybe a Sorcerer that you summoned and then got killed. Note that you can't even get back Relinquished if it was summoned properly. So if you go Black Illusion Ritual, summon Relinquished, and it dies, you can get it back with Premature Burial. But if you discard that Relinquished to, say, a Raigeki Break, you can't get it back with Pre. So I would consider cutting the Pre. We also have the main deck Swords, which I have seen in a few other Chaos decks as kind of a anti-aggro hedge. I mean, Swords isn't a terrible card. I mean, it's not amazing by any means, but you could definitely main deck it. You could side deck it too. Speaking of the side deck, pretty standard overall. I like the Brain Control Mobius combo in the side. Note that this deck will summon Mobius pretty easily just because you can go, Goats meta, Thousand Eyes, take your guy, tribute for Mobius. You can go Black Illusion Ritual, summon Relinquished, take your guy, tribute for Mobius. So that's kind of nice. Not sure what the poison of the old man was for on the side. Maybe the tournament used time and it was like a thing that you sided when you're going into time. I'm not sure. Not familiar with the details. I also actually like the side deck card destruction. This is definitely something that stands out as being a little unusual, but this deck can get a little bricky. So I like the idea of, well, we're not going to main card destruction because there are going to be so many Chaos Mirrors, But against something like Warriors, we can side in that card destruction to discard our bricks and draw into our power cards faster. I kind of like that. Side deck Royal Decree, I think also a staple for a deck like this. If you're only maining 5 traps, you basically have to side Royal Decree. It's almost mandatory. Everything else I like, so I will say, I think this deck, pretty good meta call against the Warrior decks, pretty good meta call against the decks lacking Book of Moon. I think if you know how to play this deck well, you can definitely beat other Chaos decks. You can beat them by just poking them for damage with Manju. It is a really good strategy, a really annoying strategy, if that. The only downside is that I think this list could get a little bricky with 4 Chaos Monsters, Thunder Dragons, and 4 Ritual cards. You could trim down here somewhat, like you could trim a Chaos Sorcerer, trim a Ritual, trim the Senju, and then I think it gets a little more low variance, and you could kind of cut those for whatever you want. I think you could also cut the Premature, but overall, solid list. I like to see this deck doing well. Note that we were pretty much the only GOAT format channel that called this deck out as something that could do well in tournaments. This was months ago. I know a lot of people thought that the deck was kind of a joke, that, Ritual Chaos didn't really have what it took to get top placings. But I do think we will see some decent finishes in the future. Do I think this deck is going to take over the format? No. Is it a solid tier 2 option that can surprise people and beat Warriors and beat Chaos and potentially win tournaments? Yeah, I think so. We only got second this time, but next time maybe it'll be first. For our second deck, I was so torn, guys, and that was because I know I wanted to feature Rescue Cat, but 2 Rescue Cat decks actually got first and second in the same tournament, so I was like, well, shit, which one of these 2 decks am I going to feature in this month's meta report? And I decided I'm just going to talk about both. I like both decks for different reasons. They're both great lists. They're both decks worth talking about. So we're going to talk about both the similarities and the differences, because one similarity is the presence of Cyberstein. And this was a mistake that prior Rescue Cat decks made in the past, not playing Cyberstein. I feel like you got to play at least one. It's just such a broken last will target. And at the end of the day, yes, it's a Rescue Cat deck, but the broken card that really holds the deck together is Last Will. So you really want to capitalize on this will as much as possible with good targets. So I like that we got Cyberstein to search. I like that we've got Injection Fairy Lily to search just in case, we don't have the 5,000 to pay for Cyberstein. Don't think you need 2 Cybersteins necessarily, but I also think that 2 Steins is a hell of a lot better than 0. One thing that I also want to talk about is we're a little light on the Rescue Cat targets. We only have 6, actually. 1 Mindless Radiant, 2 Death Wombats, and 3 Pandas. Now, I think maybe you could go to like 7 targets. I don't know if 6 is quite enough. But again, I think this is an evolution of previous lists. You saw a lot of prior Rescue Cat decks just kind of maxing out on a lot of stuff, like 3 Radiant, 3 Panda, 3 Death Wombat. You don't need all that. And playing all that does make your deck a little bricky. Another option that I will mention is that you can also play Death Koala, just because it's kind of a nice burn card, like Secret Barrel. But at the same time, it can be a Rescue Cat target in a pinch. Yeah, it's only got 1100 attack, but it's better than running out a Rescue Cat target. Spells, pretty standard. A lot of Rescue Cat decks seem to like to main deck Mind Control, which I think you could do. I mean, 1, 2, 3. I think it's going to depend on the meta. How many Chaos decks you expect to face off against. Note also, we're a little lacking on the burn cards. Again, you don't need 3 of everything. I know Yu-Gi-Oh! Players, when they build their decks, they just want to play all 3 ofs, but you really don't have to. Like, 2 Geometry is fine. When just desserts is a little weird. I might even be tempted to, like, cut the Secret Barrels and go for just desserts instead, because I feel like with the Geometry, a lot of times it just deals more damage, but it really depends. It really depends. If you're expecting to face off against a lot of Chaos decks, the Secret Barrels will just deal tons of damage just because those decks draw so many cards, which is kind of a nice upside. In the side deck, not too much I really want to talk about. We got the Giant Rat and Cypher Soldier combo against Warriors, which I think is good. Overall, I think the list is solid, and, I hate to say it, but I feel like Rescue Cat could easily be the next combo deck that everyone in GOAT format starts complaining about, because there aren't really a lot of hard counters. Yeah, you can side Karibo, but it only stops some of the damage. Yeah, you can side Threatening Roar, but then they can just go off next turn. We've seen Rescue Cat put up some really solid placings. It seems like it just comes down to, do people decide to play it? When good players play this deck, it almost always does well. Second place was Alafia 2. Great player, tons of strong finishes in the past with a lot of very original and spicy decks. Yeah, again, I want to talk about the similarities of the prior list. One similarity is, again, we're a little light on those Rescue Cat targets. Again, we only have, well, here we have 7 actually, because we have the Wicked Worm Beast. But only 1 Panda, because we have no Geometrios, so that makes sense. Only 2 Mindless Radiants. You don't really need the full 3. Got 3 Death Wombats, and then the Wicked Worm Beast. So I think that's fine. And again, you'll notice we do have the Cyberstein. I really feel like Cyberstein is a staple in this deck. Clearly, both these players agreed with me. Both of these decks were siding Royal Decree. Now, the last list already maining 9 traps, so not sure how I feel about the sided Decree here, but Royal Decree, it remains a really strong side deck card, and I definitely think we will see that continue to be the case. Now, here we've also got Reinforcement of the Army. This was similar to the Rescue Cat list that we premiered in a previous video, and that list had Goblin Attack Force. This list has no Goblin Attack Force main or side. I might like to see 1 Goblin in the main deck just to be a Rota target. Like maybe you cut one of these DD Assailants for the Goblin. I think that could offer you a little more strength in the Warrior matchup. And here I notice we're siding the Zombira, but not the Goblin, which not sure if I agree with that, but that's pretty minor. So again, you know, I like this list. Really clean list here. We've got, again, the Mind Controls in the main deck. And recall that Rota mainly here just because Exiled Force is a broken card in this deck. So you just want to have as much exiled access as possible. You know, that's why we've got, I think we've got only 4 Warriors here. Yeah, you only need 4. Like 4 or 5 with 2 Rotas, totally fine. I like everything else. And like I said, Rescue Cat, it's not going away. It is a really strong deck, got a lot of solid matchups, very difficult to counter, and it can absolutely tear up tournaments in the right hands. Next up, we've got to talk about this first place Chaos deck list from Boxies. And if you look at this at first, you know, you cover up like 4 cards, you're like, wait, this just looks like a standard Chaos deck. What's the big deal here? But then you notice, wait a second, 2 main deck meta, 2 main deck goats? And yeah, I mean, I think this was a great meta call. You'll notice sort of the patterns every month. Often, the decks that I feature, you'll have multiple decks kind of exploiting the meta in the same way. And much in the way that Ritual Chaos deck had 2 goats, 2 meta in it. Here we see a more standard Chaos deck, also with 2 goats, 2 meta. The main deck, you'll notice, it's the monsters are pretty much the same lineup that we see in all the Chaos decks. The only difference is that the standard monster lineup usually plays 3 spies, and traps also pretty standard. You know, we've got the staple traps, obviously, like the Mirror, the Ring, the Torrential. Then we got a couple of discard spells. Then we got the 1 solid, which, again, you see a lot of Chaos decks playing. And then, yeah, instead of the upstarts, we've got Goats meta, which seems like an improvement to me. We've got 1 Book of Moon here, no main deck Mind Control, and only 1 sided Mind Control. If everyone isn't playing Book of Moon, then, you know, Goats meta starts looking pretty good again. You know, I talked to so many Goat format players who just think that, like, oh yeah, I figured out all the best cards. Like, these cards are good, these cards aren't good, boom, you know, meta solved. But that isn't how it goes. This stuff all happens in rotations. What we're going to see is that, you know, at some point, Book of Moon will make a comeback, and then the Goats metas will start disappearing from the main deck again, and then people will stop playing Book of Moons, and then the Goats meta slowly start creeping back in again, and it just goes sort of back and forth. We see that a lot. I think we might even be seeing a similar cycle potentially could happen with Mind Control even, where Mind Control is very good in main deck right now, but if we see some decks changing up their monster lineup to counter that, then people won't main deck Mind Control anymore, and so on and so forth. So with the main deck, not really a lot to talk about. You've seen plenty of Chaos decks before, I'm sure most of you. You know, I will say one thing that's kind of weird is we got 2 Raigeki Break, 1 Wing Blast. You usually don't see a split like this. Usually you see 3 of one, 0 of the other. I like Wing Blast more, but, you know, some people like Raigeki Break more. I also do like the main deck Solemn. I'll be more specific. I like 1 main deck Solemn. In a Chaos deck like this, if you're going to play Solemn, I think 1 or 2 is better than 3, just because statistically speaking, the fewer copies of a card you play, the more you see it in the late game as opposed to the early game. And Solemn is much better in the late game. Side deck, not too much to really talk about. There's nothing that exciting. I mean, we have one more Goats meta, clearly for the aggro decks. We've got a creature swap to even pair with that Goat. We can creature swap Tsukiyomi, Sangan, Sinister, what have you. That's all well and good. Swords, anti-aggro. We've got the side deck Mobius. And again, since we've got Goats meta, the Goats meta, the third will come in versus aggro, and then we also bring in the Mobius, and then we can kind of blow them out by going Goats meta, Thousand Eyes, take your guy, tribute Thousand Eyes for Mobius, blow up 2 of your back rows. We've already talked about that. One Death Shoot in the side with no Death Shoots in the main deck is a little weird. In Chaos decks right now, I like Death Shoot main deck. I mean, here we don't really have room for it in the main deck because we decided to play Goats meta instead. So that makes sense to me. To me, the siding one copy is a little strange. Everything else looks, I don't know, standard-ish. Again, one's Umbrea, one Berserk Gorilla. I mean, that's a little strange too. To me, it's like I'd figure out which one is better and go 2-0. Stuff like Mystic Walk. I mean, it's, you haven't really seen as many burn decks lately, but note that, we did show Rescue Cat before, and some of those Rescue Cat decks do play Geometrio, so that could be a card that you side in against Rescue Cat if you think they're playing Geometrio, because some lists play it, some don't. So that's something you've got to pay attention to. Just wanted to talk about this deck to, well, 1, congratulate Moxies on the first place finish, and 2, showcase that pattern of we see the Goats meta creeping back into the meta as people start cutting those Book of Moons. So that is something that you got to stay on top of if you want to win GOAT format tournaments. You got to pay attention to what the meta is doing and use that information to evaluate what card choices are good right now. Will this deck list be good in, say, 3 months from now? Not necessarily, but I think it was a good list for a tournament in May. And last but not least for this month, we've got a first place Warrior deck from Jonathan LeBounty. And I want to talk about how much I love this deck, because this deck is super well constructed. First off, we've got 2 main deck mind controls. And last month when I talked about multiple main deck mind controls in Warriors, I know some people kind of acted like it was a joke or a meme or something. This is actually a really good choice right now. And I want to briefly talk about how to use mind control in a Warrior deck to just absolutely destroy a Chaos opponent. So what you do is you don't just mind control the first set monster that you see. What you try to do is you set up a situation where you know for a fact that their face down monster is really important, and then you mind control. So here's how you do this, because what a good Chaos player will do against Warriors is that they will set Sangan or Sinister Serpent to try to bait your mind controls. But what you do is you use your Blade Knight or your Mystic Swordsman and you attack their face down monster first. So if it's something like Sangan, especially with Mystic Swordsman, if your Mystic Swordsman attacks a face down Sangan, they're just going to let the hit go through. If your Blade Knight attacks a set Sinister, they're just going to let the hit go through, add the Sinister to their hand next turn. But if you attack with that Blade Knight or that Mystic Swordsman, and they stop it with something like Mirror Force or Ring or Raigeki Break or Book of Moon, whatever their battle chop is, if they stop the attack, it means that that set monster is something that they need to protect from Blade Knight, from Mystic Swordsman. And then what you do after they Mirror Force that Blade Knight is then main phase 2, you mind control their set, Magician of Faith, take that monster, flip it, use it against them. And that is a massive blowout. It's very hard for them to recover from that, and you're just going to win the game. So I like those double mind controls in the main deck, and I think it's something that you should do. LeBounty, by the way, was not the only Warrior player this month to do this. There were a couple of others as well. And then second, what I like about this list is, like the Warrior list that we featured last month, a little bit lighter on the trap lineup. And here we even went as far as 0 Sakuretsu in the main, which I could totally get behind. I like all these traps here. I think if you wanted to slim down the trap lineup even more, you could even cut the Call of the Haunted. Since we're not playing Sakuretsu and we're playing Book of Moon and Smashing Ground instead, pretty clear why that is, right? LeBounty was worried about Decree. And if you're a Warrior player, Decree is really the elephant in the room right now. You're going to see a lot of Decrees, whether it's from the main deck or the side deck. So you got to have a plan for it. And LeBounty's plan was, I'm just not going to play that many traps. If you open with Dust Shoot, a lot of times you'll just be able to sneak that Dust Shoot in under their Decree. And, of course, we got Solemn that can potentially negate Decree. We can chain Dust Tornado to Decree to destroy it. You gotta, of course, get the timing right there. But that is an option as well. So I like that this deck is going to do really well against Chaos. I like this deck is going to do a lot better than most versus Decree. That's compared to other Warrior decks. Everything about this deck is really great. The monsters, the spells, the chops. The reason that Warriors are a good deck is because it does well against Chaos. So I feel like with Chaos still being the most popular deck, now again, that may change if you're playing, especially Warriors, just build your main deck to counter Chaos, right? Just the same way that people did 5 years ago with Goat Control, right? You'd build your main to counter Goat Control, and you'd have the side handle everything else. Now, you still do the same thing, except these days, Chaos is the top dog instead of Goat Control. So this strategy is great. This deck list is great. If I were going to play at a tournament tomorrow, something like this would definitely be one of the decks that I would want to test because I think there's a lot of potential here. Now, I will talk about this main deck Magician of Faith a little, and I might even do a video later just on flip effects in Warriors and the pros and cons to doing this. I think instead of playing this Faith as a flip in the main, you could go with the Spies in the main instead. And what I like about this is, well, what, it saves you a little bit of room in the side because these Spies go from the side to the main, then you can side something else. And it also makes your mind control better. Like if you mind control their set spy, you can flip it and then get your own spy, which is a pretty nice bonus. And lastly, and I think this is something that players overlook, in game one, if your opponent uses Nobleman of Crossout on your spy, they have to get rid of all of their spies too. And that is pretty nice because Gravekeeper Spy is the bane of a Warrior player's existence, right? That is the one monster that you are trying to watch out for, is that Gravekeeper Spy. So setting spy, getting it crossed out, and just knowing that, oh, for the rest of the game, I don't have to deal with any more spies. That is really nice, and I think that's a little underappreciated. We do have some other spy outs, though. Got, like, Smashing Ground, right? That can kill a spy. We can mind control their spy, flip it up, pass it back, and then play Smashing on the spy the next turn. Side is fine, pretty standard. Not too much that really jumps out at you. Well, there is one card, and that's Giant Trunade. I actually like this side deck Giant Trunade. And I think a lot of Warrior players aren't going to side this because it's a -1. And if you're looking at this in the side, you probably think, well, it's mainly for burn, I guess. And yeah, Trunade, it's okay against burn. So is Mobius. But Trunade is actually pretty strong in the Warrior mirror. Now, GOAT format, it's often billed as a format that's all about card advantage. But some of the modern stuff from Yu-Gi-Oh! Still applies in that positioning matters too, board control matters too. So what's nice about this Trunade in the Warrior mirror is that if they've got a Blade Knight with a bunch of set back rows, going Trunade is a great play. Well, why is that? Well, they can solemn their Trunade, but if they solemn your Trunade, you're thrilled. You're like, awesome, I traded my Trunade for a solemn, got them to pay half their life points. So most of the time, they just won't solemn. They're going to let all of the back rows go back to their hand, but then if you bounce all those back rows to their hand, now their Blade Knight isn't 2,000 anymore. It goes down to 1,600. And then you could just run it over with your own Blade Knight, or maybe even go for big damage with this Cypher Soldier. Just kind of a nice way to take a board position that maybe your opponent is ahead on. You know, you're thinking, oh, they got Blade Knight, they got 5 back rows. How am I possibly going to get through? Well, Trunade, that's how. And then you just turn the tables. You summon your own Blade Knight, run over theirs, set all your back rows, and then now they've got to deal with your board instead of the other way around. So I like this. And as far as side goes, got Amazonas Archer. We can Rotif that against the Ojama Trio decks. You don't have to side this. You could go something like Cliff instead. You could also throw the Sombre in the side as another Rota target. Of course, the 3 sackers in the side. For not maining him, we're going to side him. Makes sense to me. So yeah, congrats to all 5 of these duelists here that did really well in these tournaments over the last month. Thanks for watching, and if you liked this video and you want to find out more about that Ritual Chaos deck, that is a deck that is going to continue to do well, then watch this video here.